This episode of the Skypilot project is brought to you by Video. This is episode 4 of the Skypilot project, education, the poor, and what we're going to be doing about it. Alright, so thanks for joining us for another episode of the Skypilot project. Last week we talked about Cable One and their CEO. This week we're going to talk about the subject I was going to talk about last week, which is education, the poor, and what our goals for that are. So just a few facts about poverty in education. So poverty affects roughly 30 million children. 46.2 million Americans are living in poverty. The dropout rates for 16 to 24-year-old students who come from low-income families are 7 times more likely to drop out than those with families of higher incomes. Keep in mind the poverty level as of 2011 was $23,021. And that consists of a family of 4 of 2 adults and 2 children under the age of 18. 40% of children live in poverty and aren't prepared for primary schooling. Children that live below the poverty line are 1.3 times more likely to have developmental delays or learning disabilities than those who don't live in poverty. By the end of the 4th grade, African American, Hispanic, and low-income students are already 2 years behind grade level. By the time they reach the 12th grade, they are 4 years behind. In 2013, the dropout rate for students in the nation was at 8% for African American youth, 7% for Hispanic youth, and 4% for Asian youth, which are all higher than the dropout rate for Caucasian youth, which is 4%. Less than 30% of students in the bottom quarter of incomes enroll in a 4-year school. Among that group, less than 50% graduate. So the need for education for the poor, for low-income families and individuals, for low-income children in low-income housing, income families, is very important. This has been an issue since America first started. It's not going to be anything that's going to get solved anytime soon. However, one thing I want to kind of highlight is the 1964 State of the Union that President Johnson gave, which happened just 7 weeks after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I think it's important. He declared a war on poverty back then, and it's something that we're still fighting today. A lot of the programs we have now were established back then in 1964 during Lyndon Johnson's presidency. And it was an important time, both for civil rights and for low-income families. And he was pretty ambitious with his plan. I'm going to be highlighting that portion of his State of the Union later with an audio clip. But I think it's important that we recognize the importance for education for low-income families, low-income children. Education being everything from elementary school, middle school, high school, skills training after they get out of high school, and even secondary education such as university. We need to have more programs that help facilitate families to transition out of poverty and into either lower middle class or mid-middle class, or even further if they're able to. Poverty is something that we're going to have to deal with for quite a while. The impact on families who have low income or who are low income is pretty great. Thankfully, we do have school lunch programs in most places, but not everywhere. Kids who have access to those school lunch programs tend to do better in school because they're not hungry when they go to class. A lot of low-income families can't afford food for breakfast. They generally tend to eat 1, maybe 2 meals a day. So the fact we have those breakfast programs in most schools is important. The fact that we have a free lunch program is vitally important to education, especially for low-income kids in school. And it's just so stressful for kids who are in low-income families. They can't have everything that their peers have. Most of the time, they don't even have most of what their peers have. Most low-income kids are dealing with either hand-me-downs or very rarely get new clothes for school. Um, so that's something we're definitely going to want to address. Um, but right now, I think we really need to focus on education and helping low-income individuals, low-income children get access to better education. The better the education, the more likely they're going to succeed in other endeavors. Um, right now, I want to kind of take a moment and listen to the portion of the State of the Union address that President Johnson gave in 1964. Um, this is something that culminated starting all the way back with the New Deal with President Roosevelt. President Kennedy, this was also a ticket item on his list when he was president. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to see that through. But Lyndon Johnson picked up his baton and carried it all the way through until the end of his presidency. So I'd like to take a moment to listen to his State of the Union, at least a portion of it that's important to our discussion, and then we'll discuss it later. Just a quick note, though, this podcast will be a little bit longer than usual because of the audio clip. After we get done listening to the audio clip, we'll discuss the issues that were brought up in it a little bit further.
And this administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America. And I urge this Congress and all Americans to join with me in that effort. It will not be a short or easy struggle. No single weapon or strategy will suffice. But we shall not rest until that war is won. The richest nation on earth can afford to win it. We cannot afford to lose it. $1,000 invested in salvaging an unemployable youth today can return $40,000 or more in his lifetime. Poverty is a national problem requiring improved national organization and support. But this attack, to be effective, must also be organized at the state and the local level and must be supported and directed by state and local efforts. For the war against poverty will not be won here in Washington. It must be won in the field, in every private home, in every public office, from the courthouse to the White House. The program I shall propose will emphasize this cooperative approach to help that 1/5 of all American families with incomes too small to even meet their basic needs. Our chief weapons in a more pinpointed attack will be better schools and better health and better homes and better training and better job opportunities to help more Americans, especially young Americans, escape from squalor and misery and unemployment roles where other citizens help to carry them. Very often, a lack of jobs and money is not the cause of poverty, but the symptom. The cause may lie deeper in our failure to give our fellow citizens a fair chance to develop their own capacities, in a lack of education and training, in a lack of medical care and housing, in a lack of decent communities in which to live and bring up their children. But whatever the cause, our joint federal-local effort must pursue poverty, pursue it wherever it exists, in city slums and small towns, in sharecropper shacks or in migrant worker camps, on Indian reservations, among whites as well as Negroes, among the young as well as the aged, in the boom towns and in the depressed areas. Our aim is not only to relieve the symptom of poverty, but to cure it, and above all, to prevent it. No single piece of legislation, however, is going to suffice. We will launch a special effort in the chronically distressed areas of Appalachia. We must expand our small but our successful area redevelopment program. We must enact youth employment legislation to put jobless, aimless, hopeless youngsters to work on useful projects. We must distribute more food to the needy through a broader food stamp program. We must create a national service corps to help the economically handicapped of our own country as the Peace Corps now helps those abroad. We must modernize our unemployment insurance and establish a high-level commission on automation. If we have the brain power to invent these machines, we have the brain power to make certain that they are a boon and not a bane to humanity. We must extend the coverage of our minimum wage laws to more than 2 million workers now lacking this basic protection of purchasing power. We must, by including special school aid funds as part of our education program, improve the quality of teaching and training and counseling in our hardest hit areas.
So, as you can see, President Johnson covered quite a bit of ground in that speech, and a lot of it's still true. In fact, most of it still is. For every dollar that's invested, you get about a 40 times return, and probably a lot more once you adjust for inflation. His war on poverty was overshadowed quite a bit by our entry into the Vietnam conflict, but it wasn't any less true, and he still worked on it all the way up until he left office. This is something we're going to have to work on together. It's not going to be easy. Even President Johnson knew that when he mentioned it previously. And this is going to be something that's going to take a while to take care of. Education and poverty kind of go hand in hand. I'm going to cover a couple other things here for you. CoveringPoverty.org has some interesting facts. Here's a few facts they have on their website where they're talking about poverty and education. Poverty is both a cause and effect of insufficient access to quality education. A 2003 study sponsored by the National Center of Children in Poverty found that in families whose income falls below 200% of the federal poverty line, children score far below average on reading, math, and general knowledge tests. A lack of education perpetuates poverty, and breaking this cycle is key to overcoming persistent poverty. In this particular case, Georgia, data suggests that poverty affects increases the likelihood a student will not graduate high school and will miss more days of school than his or her more affluent counterparts. Extremely low graduation rates plague every state, not just the southern states. Um, Large cities with large low-income populations, including minority populations, are usually highest hit. Here's some other facts from the same website covering poverty.org. Um, so high school dropouts will generally make about $22,100 a year. High school graduates will make about $29,500. Um, College graduates, obviously, are going to be making about $60,000 a year. A high school dropout over their lifetime is only going to make about $884,000 throughout their entire life. A high school graduate over their lifetime can make between 1.18 million to, if they graduate college, 2.36 million. So, better education equals better off for everybody else. The more they make, the more they're going to spend in the economy, the more our economy is stimulated. Obviously, it's all, interconnected. Um, Skills training is sorely lacking within the low-income community. Um, Even for me, when I'm looking to get some more skills, I look at community colleges and the local college here, and it's pretty expensive. Um, the amount of student debt that a low-income student will acquire is probably, I would guess, probably 5 or 6 times more than students who come from more affluent families who can afford to pay out more for that student's education. Because generally speaking, low-income students aren't only just getting the grant and the loans, but they're also working to also help pay for their education. So they're both full-time students and full-time employees. So they're basically working 2 full-time jobs while they're in school. And that can be hard to keep up over a course of a 4-year education, just for your bachelor's or your associates, what have you. Um, Young children from low-income families will absolutely score significantly lower on literacy and math assessments before starting kindergarten, because low-income families aren't necessarily um, promoting the reading and math skills that are necessary in order to get started in school. That gap gets wider as they go through school. Um, and because of a lot of different factors, diet being one of them, um, yeah, it can be tough for a low-income student in school. Very tough. Um, and we're just not going to get the help right now that we need, especially from on the federal level. Um, the Republican Party has clearly stated and shown that they don't care about low-income families. They don't care about low-income students. They have on more than one occasion tried to cut the free lunch program from schools on the federal level. And many state legislatures that are Republican run have also tried to do that as well. Usually, most of the time, there's a pretty big outcry, and then they kind of stop. This is going to be a problem that's going to be around for a while. And that's what it is. I'd like to thank you for listening to the Skypilot Project Weekly, Episode 4. I'd like to thank WeVideo for being our very generous sponsor and allowing us access to their very awesome online video audio editing software. We're very appreciative to WeVideo for that. If you have any questions, you can get us on Twitter at Skypilot Renewed, at the Skypilot Project. You can get us on Facebook. And of course, on the website, the skypilotproject.org. Please let us know what you think. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions for shows, please let us know. Thank you and have a nice day.